70s, and earlier you failed to remember that even Tasmania had laws against homosexuality as late as the 80s. So if you were Oscar Wilde at the turn of the century, being victimised, as Matt says, being persecuted by these immoral laws, would you have the courage to come out, say something and say they're wrong? We'd like to think we would, but here we are, the 20th century, and we are facing the same sort of moral abomination. There is no other way to put it. This is wrong. Wrong. It's been wrong since I was at university smoking pot. I was naive enough in those days to believe that laws would be changed. But they haven't. We still have dogs at bloody festivals where kids are out trying to have a good time, enjoy themselves, being harassed. I mean, if that doesn't put the hairs on someone's back up or a large moral compass that this is wrong. And this is wrong because we're a society of limited resources. When the police start to send the sniffer dogs down to the station to harass young kids because of their political directive, they're ignoring murders, assaults, domestic violence. We live in a world country of limited resources, and every dollar we spend as a society on enforcing this prohibition comes straight out of the welfare and the utopia that I believe we can build. And like a simple example, figures were put around there, the $4 billion marijuana market. You've got $7 billion consumer market in drugs in Australia. Let's just tax that at, let's say, over roughly 50%. $3.5 billion would go a long way for schools, for education, for rehabilitation. Balance the budget if that's someone's problem at the moment. So look, I'll just go back a little bit about why Drug Law Reform Party, why I at 57 decided to form a political party. The reason for that is I've just had a gutful. This has just gone right. I believe that the major parties will refuse to even look at this issue. They'll beat that bloody law and order drum to and unite it for their own electoral advantage, their own self-interest. And to me, that is an abomination of politics. Politics, and people don't know I come from a political family, but politics is the aim of trying to get the best outcome for most of the
it is an abomination.
I'm afraid those that beat this self-interest drum of trying to get elected and more law and order are not acting in the interest of you, your kids, or society at large. And if you're getting a little bit of idea that I'm a bit pissed off about this, you'd be pretty much right. 40 years of suffering of prohibition. And look, I come out of the closet myself. I'm a recovered drug addict. I only say that as a part of perhaps a little bit of context for what I do, but I don't ever think that my passion for this subject has to do with my addiction. I want to say, put it on record, that drugs are dangerous. Matt, they're bloody dangerous. People get addicted, people die of overdoses, they destroy families. Drugs are dangerous. But, unfortunately, this reaction of banning them creates more problems than the drugs themselves. A lot of things are dangerous in life. Maybe firecrackers are dangerous. Alcohol. Drugs are dangerous. But is that a reason to ban something? No. Unless, of course, the benefit of banning, the effort, whatever you do in banning it, is better than the result. In this case, it's clearly not. There's a $7 billion in Australia black market going to criminals and terrorists. I mean, that's a good idea. Let's ban this, create a $7 billion bucket. We'll just handball that over to the despicable the criminal gangs. And the worst of that, the terrorists in Afghanistan and in South America are profiting by this obscene prohibition. So I guess, with the warning, and I am aware that by saying drugs are dangerous, this can be used against the cause, but unless we're honest and open about this argument, then we won't have any headway as a movement. And that's the point of forming Drug Law Reform Australia. We are a political party dedicated to this one issue because we see it as a major issue that will not get resolved without direct political action. Now, with respect to Richard, first lines of the Greens policy, the drug policy, I should say, if anyone would like to quote it, but we are not in favour of legalisation. And the poor Greens, I mean, they were brave buggers 6-7 years ago. They came out and said, we want to legalise lawyers, and they got the hell knocked out of them in the press. They went back, and with the benefit of Bob Brown, who was steering them towards... I'm sorry. Look, have some questions, please. The Greens policy... Have you finished?
I was just asking you to close your speech.
Would you like to quote the first line of your policy?
No.
Okay, good. Let's not distract the whole policy. Okay, so the Greens, bless their hearts, and I'm not going to give the Greens all their drug policy, but I'm just saying they scribbled it when put under pressure from the major parties, and they simply decided that we are not in favour of legalisation. Well, I say, damn that, let's bloody legalise. Why won't we legalise? What's wrong with legalisation? We legalise prostitution. As the owner made reference to. We've legalised a lot of things. What do we do when we legalise them? We regulate them. Makes sense, doesn't it? What do we do when we regulate them? We tax them. Makes sense, doesn't it? We tax it so we can put the money from those vices. I'm happy with that term. Gambling, prostitution, the pleasures of mankind, womankind. We tax them. We tax prostitution these days. We tax alcohol. We tax cigarettes. We tax these things. And this is the only way forward. And this party is trying to raise this debate and get some consensus. Now, I get a little carried away, so I'm a little bit lost of time. How much time have I had, Nicole? Good, we're not fussed, so let me give you 3 minutes and I'll wind it up. That's all good. I've worked in harsher environments than this, Nicole, where you get bells and gongs and then they give you a bloody book and talk about it nicely. Okay, look, I'll just finish up with one little story, if I may. It's a story my father used to tell. It's a lovely story. It's a story about when he was travelling in Lebanon. And he was an inquiring young man, very religious in nature, and he asked the 90-year-old Arab man the differences between Christianity and his religion, Islam. Now, after a time, this little old man said, "Young man, why do you Westerners always look for differences, not similarities? Because if you first look for differences between you and any man, you will find so many that it will seem an utterly futile search to look for differences." So, I guess in relation to the drug issue, we are looking for similarities. We're looking for those people, and here's the funny thing, we've got a room full, I think, of people believing in prohibition here. But look, we're not the majority, we're a massive minority. We are under attack at every turn of the way for our belief that drugs should be legalised, regulated and taxed. We should stop criminal prosecution. We should give people access to health and health care. But there is a large proportion of the community that reacts very strongly for this. Really, because I think they're scared of drugs. Drugs are scary. Drugs can destroy lives, bankrupt a person's soul, ravage the human body, steal one's humanity, destroy families, break the hearts of loved ones. Drugs are scary. But also, drugs are miraculous. They can return life to the dying, reduce pain from the suffering, transform the lives of the mentally ill, and facilitate that modern miracle of organ transplants. And used in moderation, drugs can be pleasurable and used for recreation, no doubt. But they're neither good nor bad. The utility depends on how they are used. And I guess I mentioned this as a starting point for a discussion that we're going to have as a society in the next 10 years. We're going to have a discussion about, and this is the pivotal point, what is best for our children? An environment of prohibition or one of open education and access to facilities of health? Thank you very much.
So hi everyone, and there's probably a few people in the room wondering why I'm speaking tonight, because I'm not part of the political party. I'm not speaking here on behalf of the political Party. I'm here as the Executive Officer for the Yarra Drug and Health Forum. And the Yarra Drug and Health Forum is a community-based agency working in Yarra, which is Richmond, Collingwood, Detroit, looking at informing policy, advocating around a whole range of issues to do with drugs and alcohol. And I guess as far as a place in Victoria is concerned, it has significant drug issues. Yarra has some pretty significant drug issues, and it's been well known for having an open drug market around Richmond and Abbotsford, and there's significant issues around other illicit drug use within Yarra, and I'm here to talk about the local perspective. So I thank Nicole for inviting me along to speak tonight, and hope that I can give some objectivity to this discussion. So, as I said, you may note that I'm the only non-politically aligned speaker here tonight, and I don't want to lose track of my purpose for being here. I am, of course, speaking about the harms of drug prohibition at the local level. However, I would like to be given enough rope and take this opportunity, without hanging myself, to quote a few politicians about drug policy, none of whom are here tonight, I might add. Unless Richard Nixon is here tomorrow. Let's look first at US President Richard Nixon, who, interestingly enough, was under the influence of alcohol and mood-altering drugs not legally prescribed to him, and was considered by many to be mentally unstable for a significant part of his term of office. America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. That was 1972, over 40 years ago. The drug war had started. Thus, drug abuse went from a relatively obscure problem, impacting on just a few, to a new political tactic, a wedged issue. A distraction from another war, of course, the Vietnam War. Political capital in conducting a war on drugs had now taken hold, and immediately a drug war industry was born, with police, prisons, politicians, prosecutors, and the press, yes, all the P words, profiting from this new drug offensive. Well, let's not forget that the first casualty when war comes is truth. So said Warren W. Johnson, Senator for California in the US Senate in 1917. So what is the truth about drug prohibition and the war on drugs at the local level? The truth or evidence of the failure of drug prohibition is quite evident in its application on the streets. Let me give you some examples. If I buy a pack of cigarettes from a shop and walk out on the street, and I get asked by a passerby to sell one for $1, I'm technically breaking a minor law, but will I get strip searched by police? No. If I buy a carton of beer for $30 and sell it to my father-in-law for $40, will my house get raided at 4 a.m? No. I might get struck off the wheel, but if I take an ecstasy tablet or smoke a joint, am I likely to start abusing my partner and children, king hit my best friend, and smash up the local train station? No. But will I be subjected to a drug dog search at a dance party? Yes. Will I get searched the same way at a hotel while I'm drinking? No. If I have a dependency on heroin or cocaine, will I be ostracised from society, labelled a junkie, stigmatised, discriminated against, persecuted and punished? Or if my name is Keith Richards, George W. Bush or Francis Rossi? No. And for those of you who don't know who Francis Rossi is, and there are quite a few young people in the audience, he's the lead guitarist of a band called Status Quo. And he had a raging cocaine habit, which is cost him about $2.5 million. And he's the guy who was on the ads for Coles saying, the prices are down, the prices are down. So indirectly, when you buy Coles, you're actually paying for his cocaine habit. So, however, if I'm from an abusive, disadvantaged and broken family, if I have to score heroin on the streets and inject in a dirty laneway in North Richmond with my kids watching and then get rid of my needles quickly in someone's backyard, so I won't be caught by the police, who are everywhere, and then head off to my job as a street sex worker, then yes, the community hates me. If I try to give up the gear, my criminal history of drug use will constantly haunt me and be a reminder to my family, prospective employers and my landlords that once a junkie, always a junkie. Will this drive me back to the life I've only ever known, but despise so much? Probably. We all choose to use drugs. We live in a society that takes drugs. They provide many benefits. But no one I know ever chose to become the most despised and reviled members of society, as heroin users in particular have become. Over 400 people die from heroin overdose in Australia each year, the equivalent of a jumbo jet for a people crashing annually. Yet do we go to any lengths to stop this happening? Do we go out of our way to make it safer to use heroin? Obviously not. The community continues to view these deaths as collateral damage and frown on any policies that might obscurely send the wrong message, such as prescribing heroin for long-term users. I regularly read newspaper online, and I know when we talk about the harms of prohibition and the war on drugs, we always talk about the impact on users, and I think that's really, really important. But I often look for the more obscure things when it comes to the war on drugs and prohibition. And I was reading through The Age online today as I was busily trying to avoid my 4-year-old daughter while she was demanding something like more food or something. And I read an article about some factories out at Dandenong who can't get insurance because they're so close to a bikie headquarters, an outlaw motorcycle gang headquarters. They can't get insurance for fire because the bikies' headquarters is continually bombarded by other bikies getting shot at and being firebombed. And I thought, well, that's a good example of a failure of prohibition and the war on drugs, because obviously it's a turf war. The majority of amphetamine marketing in Australia is controlled by outlaw motorcycle gangs. So if you're a factory owner out at Dandenong and you can't get fire insurance, you can blame the war on drugs. We need political leadership to change the way the community views illicit drug use and address the inconsistencies, myths and misconceptions that prohibition and the war on drugs have used as propaganda tools. There are no warlike people, just warlike leaders, wrote American Nobel Prize winner Ralph J. Bunche, the first Afro-American winner of the Nobel Prize. So I hope the political leaders that we've heard from tonight will one day be in a position to end prohibition and stop waging the war on drugs against their warlike people. Thank you.
It's very unusual for me, it's actually completely usual for me to be up here, but it's very unusual for me to be up here as a politician. This is my first outing as a politician. I'm normally an academic. So normally I stand here and I have my lecture ready to go, and I'm going to be speaking to you about something that I've done lots of research on and published in a journal. So that's not what's going to happen here tonight, and I also feel very sensitive to the fact that you've been here for a while. You've been very attentive, but I'm sensing impending restlessness. So what I'm going to do is cut to the chase and just say that really all of us here pretty much on the same page. We can have some skirmishes about whether or not we're for decrim or for legalization, but I think essentially we've all been invited here because we all have an evidence-based approach, and WikiLeaks party is in love with evidence. There's lots of academics like me who are a part of it. Julian Assange is somebody who's been very interested in scientific journalism, so when you read articles on the web, he likes to give you the hypertext link so you can go for yourself and have a look. So we're a party that's in love with evidence, and the evidence is extremely clear that if what we're trying to do is to decrease harms, we're certainly not doing that. What we're trying to do is decrease the amount of drugs that are coming into the country or the amount of people who are using them. The approach we're taking simply isn't working. So there's just no question that if you follow where the evidence takes us, we're not doing the right thing. But we're not doing that. We're not following where the evidence is taking us. So I think what's interesting about all of this, and I think a lot of people have been alluding to it, is that we don't really have a problem that we seem able to solve by looking at the evidence. And of course, it's not the first problem that Australian society has faced, that we can't seem to look at the evidence square in the face and seek to solve. What would the other problem be, Colleen? Climate change. Climate change. So we've seen this problem before, where we have very clear evidence staring us in the face, and we simply can't seem to have a look at it and do what seems to need to be done according to the evidence. So what kind of problem is that? Is that an evidence problem, or is it a political problem? So it seems to me like it might be more constructive for me to spend 2 or 3 minutes that I'm going to keep you just talking about how we might look at this as a political problem and how we might seek to solve it. So if it's a political problem, what are the basic things that we need to try to overcome? So Gavin was talking about it, a couple of the politicians were talking about it. The politicians don't want to talk about it. That's the problem. The problem is they don't want to talk about it. It's in the too hard basket. And it's in the too hard basket because it seems like a no-win for them. So it seems as if, even though we can look at statistics that tell us that most Australians really aren't all that antagonistic towards drugs, many Australians use drugs, it still seems like when somebody puts their head above the parapet on this issue, there's lots of people waiting to mow them down, and the majority, who may feel completely different, is silent. So I've been very, very close to issues like this. I've worked on the abortion issue, I've worked on the dying with dignity issue. Often it can be similar to those two things, where if you take, if researchers ring up and get you on the phone and say, how do you feel about abortion, how do you feel about dying with dignity, you can find out that most people are in favour. The same would probably be true of how do you feel about the drug prohibitionist stance. Many people would probably say they're not in favour of it. They wouldn't mind drugs being decriminalised or even legalised. But if you don't speak up when the heat is on, if you don't speak up if it's on the agenda, then essentially the fact that the majority feels that way is useless. So a silent majority is useless in terms of getting anything done. So this is a political problem. It means that people have to drive it onto the agenda, which is hard enough. And then once it's on the agenda, the people who believe things need to be different can't just sit there stoned and not say anything. They have to actually speak up. So that would be one of the things I would suggest. And the other thing I would suggest, and again, I think we learn a lot from climate change about this. The climate change debate has had a lot of people who are getting increasingly frustrated. Academics like me, so I completely sympathise with them. They're going out of their minds with frustration. They have the data. They have even more data. They collect even more data. They form into academies. They form into committees. They form into even larger committees. They're, in the UN, they're international governmental committees. They have so many names. We can tell how important they are, and still nobody is listening. So this is not a fact problem. It's a political problem. It's a communication. So we have to get better at communicating and continually yelling at people. We have the facts, here's the evidence. If that's not working, it makes us need to think again about what it is that people on the other side might be saying that we might have to listen to a little bit more closely so we can actually respond to their needs. And sadly, we don't have anybody here from the other side. So I think it would have been interesting, in fact, to have them here. But we kind of know the things that they tend to say. So they tend to confuse the legal with the moral. They tend to feel like what the law needs to do is to express their moral view that drugs are bad. They're really worried that decrim or legalization looks like we're condoning drug use, or even worse, that we're giving up the war on drugs. So they're worried about all of those things. So any kind of communication strategy, and I would really advise taking expert advice on all of this. So when I watch the debate about climate change, it breaks my heart, because I'm an academic, so I really put a lot of stock in evidence, and I can see that nobody's paying attention to it. It's being overridden by other concerns. But that's a communication problem. So there's no use dragging more and more and more scientists out with even longer and longer titles to keep saying the same thing. It's not working. It's not being heard. So we need to get serious about the communications, which means we need to get serious about what the other side is saying and why it's resonating, and try to actually respond to that in a professional way that addresses the things that people are worried about. So thanks very much for your time.
So thank you all to the speakers this evening. We have one mic. Does anyone want to start with some questions?
Yeah, hi, my name's Tony. I'm also a member of the Socialist Alliance. I guess actually just listening to Leslie, the last speaker, I think it actually, I agree with that, but I think it could actually go beyond that, and I think it's also a vested interest problem. It's a big part of it. And I think there are a large number of vested interests involved in prohibition. One of the big ones is just the powers that be those people at the top of the political and social and economic hierarchies, they just don't want anything legalised if it can be illegal. And I mean, and in some ways that's part of the similarity with things like abortion, and equal marriage for that matter. You know, like there's just this incredible resistance against legalising anything which can be kept illegal. And I think some of the speakers were saying really shows the reason why. I mean, and I think Sue's point about the way drug laws can be selectively used, like that thing of sniffer dogs on different train laws. But certainly where I live around the Ascot Flats, I mean, the number of cops you see there is quite staggering. The other thing you see there, which is just very visible, is, I mean, like I've got white privilege, I've got a free pass, I could actually walk past the cop vans, but there are always young African Australian guys being searched and questioned. And I mean, then they have this lovely sort of circular argument. It's the same for sniffer dogs at the train stations. They can justify it by saying they catch more people breaking the law there. The laws broken is all small-scale soft drug possession. But I mean, it's like, well, you're not going to find it in Toorak if you're not looking for it in Toorak. So, I mean, so the way these laws can actually be used to sort of uphold other oppressions. I mean, I'd be quite interested to hear what people have got anything more to say about that. The other thing I'm interested in is with the global aspect. I mean, I think the Uruguayan thing is very interesting, where they're talking about, as some of the speakers mentioned, this sort of seed to smoking legalisation and regulation of cannabis, but not like the Dutch model where it's the back door where it comes into a coffee shop illegally, but then you can legally go and smoke it. This is like regulating the whole process. But the logic of the government doing this is precisely because a third of the population of Uruguay smoke weed. That means at the moment they're dealing with dodgy criminal elements. And I mean, a lot of Latin American countries have been absolutely devastated, and some of the speakers have been made by these criminal gang warfare. Like in northern Mexico, the body count is actually higher than in most war zones in the Middle East or Africa. But I mean, one of the things which is quite startling is if you look at the history of the world drug trade, how it sort of follows around. I mean, Sue mentioned a bit the thing of intervention, but I mean, there's Golden Triangle, the country. So I just wonder if people want to comment a bit on the international aspects of, criminalisation, but criminalisation allowing a whole lot of covert activities and stuff to happen.
Can I just make one really quick point? Then I just think it's just an interesting point that when Portugal decriminalised all drugs, it was a Conservative government that took that legislation through. And I think quite often when, as Leslie was saying, looking at those arguments, I sometimes think that the buck is a really good argument. That you start talking about the dollars and you take it down to those economic terms, and that can get through some of the hardest Conservatives. Sort of fuck the social matter, let's talk economics on it. And I think that sometimes that's a message, although, I mean, I think you made a lot of other interesting points there.
Can I suggest that we hear a bit more from the people in the audience, because everyone's heard a lot from all of us. It'd be great to get to hear what different people in the audience think.
If I could just proffer an answer to the question before we go down that path, if that's okay.
I think an answer too, but I was going to wait till anyway, you will.
Thank you. Look, the international scene is fascinating, and the biggest change there is the happening in America, who are really the architects of this war on drugs. Through Richard Nixon, but even before Richard Nixon, they had an international convention on narcotics, which they had financed from the UN, and perpetrated a despicable act upon the entire world by locking up the legal systems of each jurisdiction that signed up to this treaty, and these jurisdictions, independent sovereign countries, gave up their right for independent drug policy. The classic example was that the ACT was looking at a heroin trial in the late 90s, and it was scuttled by the International Control of Narcotics Board, came out here, whispered in a couple of years, and there's this groundbreaking trial of giving addicts a measured dose of heroin was scuttled. And that was again because of the international pressure. And internationally it's interesting, not only do we have some breaking of the ranks with America, we also have the United Nations health bodies looking very seriously at the health implications of the prohibition, whether it be AIDS or hepatitis C or other factors of crime resulting from the prohibition. But the International Control Board, bless their conservative hearts, is running into trouble, and I can see the end is nigh for them. And that's good news for a movement that is, and let me try and make this clear, an international movement for change. It's happening in every country, every continent. Uruguay is a particularly good example because it is the first country to actually legalise marijuana. We've got states in America that have legalised. This is why I'm hot on the word legalised. They haven't decriminalised. It's back to all that the Dutch people did, or even the Portugal model still has a criminal law in place. But Uruguay has, or in fact, to be perfectly accurate, will pass these laws. It's passed the lower house. The president's in favour. It should pass the Senate in a couple of months, I'm informed. So, there is a country, the first of many countries to fall towards the changing of these drug laws. And look, for the world, as I said, we could spend on feeding the starving people, spending money on education. We're talking, a $1.3 trillion marijuana market. So the benefits to the humankind, the human species, are just astronomical. And that's why this issue is really, to me, the most pivotal issue that the world and the country is going to face in the next 10 years. Sure, you can say climate change and other factors, and I'm not going to trade them off against each other, but yeah, these are important international issues.
Greg, I just wanted to add something to what you were saying, especially about the UN conventions. There's two of them that are troublesome, three, okay, that are troublesome for drug law reform. But in 2016, there will be a meeting with a lot of prominent individuals, like Professor David Nutt, who got sacked from the British, he was head of the British Drug Control, like the people from MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies in the US. And I don't know if there's any Australians heading over there, but there will be a lot of professionals who are going to look at this and hopefully change these UN conventions, because they seem to be the biggest legal obstacle, sort of abstract legal obstacle for countries to reform their drug laws.
Look, absolutely true. And if I could just add one small point, I won't take much more time, but the trouble with this international movement is we are beginning to get ahead of steam up. What worries me is that the conservatives, the reactionaries, the Puritans, the moralists are going to say, right, okay, we'll have a harm minimisation policy here, or we'll have a mitigation of that harm. They will placate us as we move forward to get a rational solution to this problem, and that's probably one of the more dangerous things that we've got to be careful of. The Portugal model, much as it's touted around as having a solution to the problem, it has some very positive aspects, there is no doubt. But personally, I do not believe the Portugal model is the perfect model that the world will follow. And this is the international context. We've got the people in Colorado trying to work out the detail of how you sell marijuana. What do you put on your packages? How do you give it to keep the school kids safe? We've learned about these things. So the world is on a change. The 2016 meeting of the international, or the UN, is absolutely significant in undoing this structure of prohibition.
I also had a sort of question, although maybe it's one for everyone to ponder generally. I know there was a recent film that was released called Breaking the Taboo, and I think that message alone is something that people can take personally. I've had a mum that's been, still got a mum, who's against me using any kind of drugs, but I've just been berating her every time I get a chance. She hates it, but I'm showing her that I'm not actually that stereotype, because I think people have a stereotype in their mind. It gets reinforced by whatever you see on a television show or whatever you see in a newspaper. And these people don't actually know what a drug consumer is. They don't know, even though it's probably the person sitting next to them at the office or the train driver that's taking them to work. They don't know who these people are. So it's vitally important, I think, for any change, for people to just go out and speak to your friends, speak to people that disagree with you, and don't get them offside as well. I think people sometimes have this habit of accidentally getting people offside, getting too emotional about it, and then somebody goes, I can drag you in there. They just want what they want. And your whole point falls apart. So talk about it with everyone.
Yeah, can I ask a question? Yeah, thanks. I think the war on drugs issue is on, or I'll just say it loudly. Look, I find the war on drugs issue to be at the heart of it an issue of self-ownership. I believe that humans own themselves, and I think the war on drugs is a complete affront to that. And I'm just wondering, and it's especially an interesting question to ask politicians, how they feel about the concept of self-ownership.
Can I answer that? Actually, I'd love to answer that. Just because my areas of activism have been abortion rights and voluntary euthanasia, I think both of them. Never thought about it that way, but I completely take on board what you're saying about it. And I think the idea of self-ownership is a great concept to pursue because we are familiar.
Do we own ourselves?
Sorry?
Do we own ourselves?
Yes, well, I completely. Well, own I think is a bad word.
Well, you know, when you go to jail for smoking a herb.
The word you use in ethics is autonomy. That you should be entitled by law to exercise your own autonomy, which means self-rule.
And so the role.
You should be able to govern yourself, and of course, partially what you're governing is what kind of things you put in your body, your medical care, what does and doesn't happen to you when you are pregnant and don't want to be, and that doesn't apply to you, but what happens to a woman, and for everybody, if you want to continue living. So the dying with dignity issue is also about self-governance. So I very much think that concept is live in terms of liberal democracies, that we ought to be autonomous human beings, and I'm also not to restrict our autonomy unfairly, and I think it falls very nicely into that category.
Sure.
I've got 14 words.
Okay.
Not counting those. John Stuart Mill. Over one's mind and over one's body, the individual is sovereign.
You're here.
I'll wait until enough questions and say a couple of words.
Can I just volunteer? I prefer this notion to be a person's ability to be able to self-govern, but in fact, I think it's important for every single person here, every person in this nation, to actually understand that the individual's opportunity and the individual's right to self-govern, they themselves may see that as a collective or communal responsibility, and they themselves may choose to see it in a different way than what is ultimately very middle-class, intellectual, already an empowered way of viewing the issue. And some people do not share that view. And many Aboriginal people in this community would not share that view. And in fact, I think it's a profound distress to me to remind you of that in the context where, in fact, the people are advocating on behalf of the most impoverished, disadvantaged people in our community and see this purely through the prism of decriminalisation or legalisation of drugs, which I fully admit is in fact full of duplicity in this country. You know, I think the major problem in this country in relation to addictive behaviour is alcohol addiction. And I believe that, and I think I've got some empirical evidence to back that up. But that's not the nature of the debate today. What I encourage you to think about is the ways that if prohibition came tomorrow, that there would be a huge social problem and social dislocation that continues to exist that we cannot address, and the idea of individual sovereignty tomorrow would not be able to remedy. And I encourage you to think about it.
All right, I've just got one question. I'm just wondering, all of that that seems to feed into the idea of generally civil libertarianism, right, as essentially the ideology or the philosophy behind what people are saying when it comes to self-ownership and so forth. And it seems to be something that crosses parties, the idea of civil libertarianism, and maybe a message that can be put out as essentially the main way of explaining it that can actually then allow the different elements of the community to come together with a sort of a coherent political statement about it. I'm just wondering what people think about the idea of civil libertarian as essentially the main thrust of the argument, rather than actually going into the details of decriminalisation and so forth.
Well, it's been our opening sentence with fundamentally a civil libertarian party, and I think that should be a principle that along with evidence directs us towards our policies and hopefully towards legislative reform.
Just on what you were talking about it being a civil liberties issue, I mean, it is a civil liberties issue, and there are also health issues as well, which is sometimes used to justify why illicit drugs are maintained in an illegal status. But I think the discussion earlier about the war on drugs, I think that is, I think this was a politically created campaign in the same way that the campaign against asylum seekers is a politically created campaign by the major parties. And I think it's interesting that Greg mentioned that the war on drugs sort of began around the same time as the Vietnam War. And I think the war on drugs has been used by the major parties in a range of countries as a way of justifying repressive laws and justifying having a big police apparatus and a prison system. And I know that in Queensland, the state that I come from, the drug laws were used in the 1980s by the Peterson government as to target political activists in particular, and they weren't used. There was no association between the way they were used and preventing harm, because they were politically targeted. So I think it's not just around a health issue, and I think this is the main reason why the major parties have been keeping various drugs in here.
I think your question goes to political organisation, and I think it's interesting to note that in order to, because things like abortion and violence, you get a conscience focus in order to stitch up enough votes to actually pass any legislation. And in Victoria, we have a mixed record, so we were able to reform the abortion laws, but we haven't really been able to achieve any kind of dying with dignity. But in order to achieve it, you have to sew up people from all the different parties.
Well, that's right, exactly. So you need to have a consistent message that pulls people together, right?
Yes, and it's consistent with the smaller liberals. So Mill is actually the sort of intellectual father of liberalism as we've understood it, and of course the right side of politics is really drifting off to conservatism. But there's still people in that party who identify as smaller liberals, and they can be sewn up with progressives, and they can be sewn up with the progressive elements of people in the Labour Party, and sometimes you can get enough. If you sell the issue that way, it makes one be thinking about making it politically active.
I suppose, like the topic just a little bit. One of the things that I also like to be talking about is a few people in the room who I know, like Greg and Peter, who have worked in this field for a long time. Janet Rice, who we were on council together, Janet was the Senate candidate. But 15 years ago in Footscray, when things were at their absolute worst and the debate around the supervised injecting room was just beginning, it was hysteria. It was a divided community. You couldn't have a rational conversation about it. It was all about drug dealers and drug users were going to overrun our community. Last year, when the debate happened in the city of Yarra, I couldn't believe the difference that 15 years had made, that people were actually able to think about this in, I think, in a much
much more civilised and reasonable manner. And I mean, Greg, you might like to comment on this too, but that's clearly what I saw. So while we're talking about these really big philosophical issues around drug use and ownership, etc., I also would like to point out that I think the debate has moved dramatically. It might not be where a lot of people on this table or in this room want it to be, but it has moved hugely in the last 15 years. And I know for myself, being involved in it at that time, people would score at Footscray Station, they would shoot up my veranda. I had never had any dealings with drug use at that time, and so I got involved in the campaign for a supervised injecting room because I saw it as the only way, and this was before I was in the Greens, it was the only way to save people's lives. And I think in this discussion tonight, we also need to be addressing actually having good services and ways of helping people in a way that's appropriate for what they want. I don't believe in forced rehabilitation. It just doesn't work. And interestingly, I was at a forum this morning where talking about drug use in the outer suburbs in the western area, no needle syringe service, only in Sunshine and Footscray. We also have to be grappling with those issues as well.
If I could just respond a little bit, injecting, safe injecting rooms are a good idea, there's no doubt. But it's not a solution, they're a band-aid on the problem. I certainly tip my hat to the work that's gone before, the people in the 80s who perhaps had to overcome some massive prejudices. But look, for just common sense, the solution to the problem of heroin addicts is give a heroin addict a measured dose of heroin from his doctor. And this has been trialled in the UK with some success, and still have a small scheme on there. With the stroke of a pen, you can wipe out black market in heroin.
So these are just practical measures, and this is again just to put a context here. I'm not trying to point score or anything, but as a movement, I think we've now got to go to the ultimate solution and not skirt the edges. And people have done fantastic jobs on getting us to some point, but it was only ever meant to be a halfway house. And if we don't go the next step now, these conservatives will turn on us and we won't get this change. And that is a real possibility. I'm 57, I've seen this pendulum go like this before. We're on the cusp of real change and policies that are going to help people and stop the suffering. But it's not going to happen unless we really make a clear concerted case.
I absolutely agree with that, Greg. I think the example we were talking about just a minute ago, the war on drugs, started in 70, 71. People still haven't figured out that it's a war on people. It's not a war on drugs, that's bullshit. That's one of those lines that creates the illusion which allows us to stomp on half of our bottom portion of society. You know, it's crap. And this harm minimisation stuff, dealing with all that, it's bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. It's keeping everyone in this prejudice and fear mode, and what Greg is saying is absolutely right. We need to get over all of this crap and just wake up and see it for what it is and move on. Injecting rooms in today's environment, we need them because it's the only way to keep people safe. But let's change the environment, let's change the perspective, and let's stop how we're going to solve all these problems. Let's say, well, actually they're not problems, you know. Sure, there are problems with drug use, but there are problems with going to football, there are problems with driving cars, there are problems with doing your tax return, there are problems with everything. There's no
having our money stolen.
It's just part of life.
Can I respond to Colleen's point? Yeah, look, you are right. I think the change in this area is quite slow. A lot of people do get very, very frustrated. And, you know, I live over in the West, and I know still there is a very active drug market in Footscray. You know, I reported to the local media 18 months ago that there is regularly needles and syringes found in a public toilet right next to the main shopping in Footscray. And there was a lot of media attention, a lot of comment from council about that. And again, it was divided. But there were more people saying, no, we just don't need to send any more police. We need to take a more considered approach towards this. it is, in the end, a political issue, and it does ebb and flow. It does swing backwards and forwards, as Greg said. I remember in 2002, just when the so-called heroin drought, or a lot of people like myself don't call it a heroin drought, call it the normalising of availability of heroin after the glut in the 90s. John Howard got up in the federal parliament and said, you know, we knew what course of action we needed to take. We needed to take a law enforcement approach. We didn't submit to the harm minimisation lobbyists. You know, and harm minimisation has been our national policy for 20 years. So here is the Prime Minister criticising our own policy. So, you know, again, it gets back to a little bit about political opportunism, and I hope that political opportunism is slowly being diminished or watered down. Now and again, I hear people say involved in politics say, "Oh, I don't think the electorate is right for that." But my comment is, well, who's going to change that? You know, this is what political leadership is about. This is, you know, I explained earlier that my background is in policing. I spent a lot of time as a police officer, and to me, leadership is about showing the way forward and bringing people with you. So it's a pity that we have to wait until the politicians retire before they come out and say, well, you know, personally I think it's what I'm going to say is the party. So I think change is happening. I think it is slow, and people do get frustrated. But I do think that with a combination of people such as the people in the room today.
Once health works really got going, once those programs happened to actually collect the syringes, people became much calmer about it. We still obviously had hotspots, but that was one of the really big things, was people were terrified of syringes in the street, when in reality, yes, McDonald's is much more dangerous than a discounted syringe.
So perhaps if McDonald's started selling heroin, it would be cool.
They'd be first in line.
I think there's one thing that is very interesting about all of this. So I think we have a sense that there's a public that has to be answered, and sometimes that is true. So in other words, if you're trying to move something through politics and you want to do it before you guys all get old, or you want to do it now, then you have to deal with what's out there, and of course you have to lead and try to shape and change behaviours. But you also have to try to work with what is out there. And so I think what is out there are a range of people who support what most people in this room, I assume everybody in this room would like, which is to see a change in policy and a decrease more legalisation approach. You have to get on board everybody who is willing to get on board, and some people will get on board with a harm minimisation approach. Some people will get on board with a liberal sort of approach around the idea that it's your body and your choice, and you should be able to do with it what you want, and it's nobody else's business. And you need to speak to all of those different groups, because like I said, it's a communications issue. We need to get the comms right, and the communications will probably involve speaking to different people in different ways, so that we can reach them and get them on board.
Jane? I guess it's my turn now. Hi, my name's Ash. I've got a question, but before I do, I just wanted to point out lingering kind of prejudice that might still be here in the room that I've heard quite a few times. People have acknowledged the prejudice from drug users, but there's been an association just this evening that I've noticed where people are associating drug traffickers as like being criminals and gangsters and all the rest of it. I've spent a bit of time in my life like selling a bit of weed and a bit of ecstasy to my friends and being around other people doing the same. And they're not criminals. I don't even speed. I don't have any traffic violations. I don't steal anything, hurt anybody. All I'm doing is responding to the peer pressure of my friends going, Ash, I like taking these things. I know that you have a better, reliable source for them than I do. can you get them for me? That's the real way that peer pressure works in, you know, like a lot of the recreational drug environment. So I just wanted to point that out. And so thank you for giving me that opportunity. And just a quick question, if I may. I was at another one of these forums a few months ago, and I put the question to Professor Pennington, who was speaking on the panel. I just kind of raised the issue, because most of the conversation on that day was about drug use and drug abuse and what to do about that part of it. And I just raised the issue at the end of it, well, what about us recreational drug users? How do you propose to solve that? And his answer was that it's going to take 10 years. It's going to take 10 years. It took Portugal 10 years to set up the policy framework, to get all of their services and their infrastructure right to be able to handle that kind of change, you know, at the upper policy level. So my question, I guess, for the people on the panel tonight is, what do you think are maybe the first 2 or 3 things that could be done? You know, like I know I've heard the Green Senator before suggest the Productivity Commission. I believe that's also the position of the Drug Law Reform Party, is to get a Senate inquiry or something like that. But, you know, you guys are coming from different perspectives tonight, so perhaps that might look different for each of the speakers up there on what you think are the first couple of things to take in that next step forward. Thanks.
First step, Ash, if I've made a quick answer, is clearly what Matt's on about with their party, the hemp party, is the legalisation, regulation, taxation of cannabis. Look, next step, we'll be looking at ecstasy quite clearly, and you know, the people in the community are going shock and horror, but you know, ecstasy is a relatively benign substance used in a safe environment, and there's one of the problems of prohibition, that a lot of these safe environments are affected by the very fact of prohibition. You know, there's cases of kids, silly as this may sound, but swallowing a handful of ecstasy on the way to a festival at the sight of police dogs. Maybe they'd already had one before they took the rest of them, I don't know. But, you know, the ecstasy might be a second area to look at. And the third one, I think, is clearly this, to the poor, hapless heroin addicts that, you know, suffer with their addiction, and they're unable to, they should be given access to medical help. And the only way you can do that is by decriminalising or giving them access to a medical dose. And ironically, heroin addicts, one of the knows, can live a healthy life with 60 years of pure heroin use. Again, it's the prohibition that creates dangers for a heroin user, and that's in terms of AIDS, hepatitis C, you know, a criminal environment where they're beaten up and robbed, and then they pass that on. It's an epidemic. Yeah, well, there's certainly, that's totally right. So it's a total prejudice, and that's again the result of this criminal framework that we have endured, this experiment, this social experiment for the last 40 years specifically. I mean, civilization is, I don't know, 3, 5, 6, 7 years old, depending when you want to say we got civilised. Some might say we're not there yet. But certainly drugs have been used from the beginning of civilisation. And this prohibition is only a social experiment that just didn't work. And it was discussed, as I've tried to allude to in the speech, in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, civil libertarians like John Stuart Mill, Abraham Lincoln, who you might not think was a natural defender of the rights of the individual. Well, maybe you would think he is a protector, but not a protector of the rights of people to use drugs. His quote, I didn't get a chance to say, is quite simply, prohibition makes a crime of things that are not a crime. I mean, can it be clearer? Now, those guys in the 16th, 17th, 18th century were talking about alcohol, and they just figured out intellectually in every other way, social policies, that it can never work. Milton Friedman, someone there said that this was not a left or right political divide. Of course it's not. It's a question of utility, the benefit, the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people in society. Milton Friedman is a Nobel Prize-winning conservative economist, and when asked about 30 years ago in his latter days, what scares me most about, this is a question to him, what scares you most about the notion of drugs being illegal, as with alcohol? He replied, nothing scares me about the notion of drugs being legal. What scares me is the notion of the continuing on the path we are on now, which will destroy our free society. Now there was a smart man.
Can I just comment? I don't think there is one or two or three maybe strategies that you need to employ. I think there's a range of strategies. I think when you're advocating for change, you need to look at how you answer everyone's questions about the issue. And sometimes that might mean focusing on issues that aren't your issues, they're someone else's issue. We may have to appeal to the broader community's sense of need. For example, when we were looking at the injecting facility in Yarra, one of the areas we looked at was the amenity, and even though I know Matt mentioned about the needle and syringe not being a danger, but it does represent something to the people who live there. So we need to look at the amenity issues, even issues around, for example, overdose, and not just from the person that's overdosing's perspective, but also ambulances have to attend overdoses, and ambulances, if they didn't have to go to overdoses, they go to something else, and that may be the lady that's fallen down the stairs at the nursing home to get her to the hospital. So you have to appeal to a broad range of needs when you're talking about advocacy, appeal to those I guess, vested interests in and why they want to change. So, and the last bit of advice was something that was told to me recently. You know if you're doing well if you can get the banner of the Herald Sun and the editorial to say that they're on your side. So that's what I recommend.
I'm fearful that it is 10 years, and I really hope that we see some significant change now. And I do think that I'd like to think that Professor Pennington is slightly conservative in that view, and that we may have we are actually reaching a tipping point. With one interesting area in I guess, reflecting on that or providing an example of that is what's happening in New Zealand with the synthetic highs. Now, they've tried Prohibition, and it's not working. And it's been a very fast realisation that Prohibition is not working. And so they have gone down a path of regulation. They've reversed the onus. They've said, right, you want to manufacture this stuff, you want to sell this stuff, you prove that it is low risk. And then from licensed outlets, you will be licensed and allowed to supply that to adults who choose to buy it under regulated conditions. And I think that's, with what's happening in Uruguay, what's happening in Colorado, what's happening in Washington, and what's happening next door in New Zealand, I think we have reached a tipping point. And I wonder whether, look, we all know that we wouldn't be having the debate on synthetics if cannabis was legal, but or other drugs. However, we are having that debate, and it is a reality. And here is an opportunity to try a regulatory model. And we've already got a lot of these products being sold from age-restricted stores where people paying GST. You've already got some semi-regulation there. So I think that would be a great opportunity to explore and try and take that further.
Why is that debate happening in New Zealand? It distracts everyone from the real debate of legalising cannabis.
No, it's because it's there, Matt. It's because it's there.
The reason it's there.
Yeah, I accept that if we make cannabis legal, then. But what I'm saying is that we have an issue right now, right here, that's happening. So we could ignore it. We can continue prohibiting synthetics here and go, but we want to keep arguing about legalisation, regulation, taxation of marijuana, which I'm right behind you on that. But I just think here's an opportunity for something right here, right now, that we could try now.
I'd just like to answer the question.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks.
I'd like you to remember what Leslie said immediately before your preamble in your question. And that's very important. The reason why I say that's very important is because Leslie was giving us collectively a message that in fact if we want to carry the day, if we actually want to have an overwhelming shift to support what's the centre of gravity in this room, you actually need to find your audiences, you need to find what pushes their buttons, and you need to be able to respond to them. Okay? So, so that's positive reinforcement. It's a backhander to you, because in fact, your preamble travelled well in this room. Your preamble would not travel well in many of the audiences that you're going to need to convince, we're going to need to convince to carry the day. So it's a provocative preamble in the context of what Leslie had said, but I remind her of what she said. You have the right to say what you said. You have absolutely no doubt about it. In fact, you have the right to express that framing and that positioning. But in fact, that is not a positioning that is immediately universally accepted, and in fact will be used by many people against listening and responding to your question. So the reason why I gave that lengthy one is because I wanted you to know that I'm here tonight, because in fact I'm prepared to engage in that, where many politicians are not prepared to engage in it. And the answer in terms of buying off this issue is far more in the space of what that Greg has said in relation to the cumulative effect of our efforts to get structurally in place what needs to be in place to deliver the results. In my argument, rather than the Greg sitting next to him, who is actually interested in a more profound, deep-seated, pure position in policy terms and legislative terms that I don't think can be achieved in one bite. I do not believe it can be, and I actually think you need to get the structures in place to be able to finally deliver the symbolism rather than the other way around. And one of the examples that I'll give is one of the things that I've been associated with was decriminalising abortion. I heard today, 3 years after that decriminalisation, it may well be that there are less late-term abortions in Victoria today, and they are harder to obtain than was the case prior to our decriminalisation of it. I just want you to always remember this. There's a difference between the symbolism and what is the structural reality of how we live our lives. And I'm interested in both, but I've got to get the sequence together.
I'm just wondering, Gavin, if you could tell us, in your view, what the kind of political messages would be that would resonate with those constituencies that we need to actually convince, are currently unconvinced and have a very strong motion reaction against decriminalisation of drugs.
Well, I just said I think there is fear. Colleen was reminding us of fear, in terms of determining the fear of the unknown, or they, and that's actually one of the reasons why politicians, why the community doesn't move, and we actually have to overcome that fear. And funnily enough, putting things in perspective is one of the ways in which you overcome that fear. And that's the issue that we fundamentally agree on. We do fundamentally agree on that in fact we are out of whack with the proportion of what is seen as the problem or the issue. I totally agree with you on that, and that's what we've got to make some moves on and try to overcome. I think then once you can demonstrate positive traction, so whether it be by picking up elements of whatever model works in Portugal or wherever it may work, what works in Sydney in terms of safe injecting facilities, if you actually can demonstrate, so wherever you are on the spectrum, I'm actually seeing this as not an issue or a major social issue, somewhere in between the truth may lie, and you seem to be addressing those elements and prove whether you're making a positive trajectory and people are more and more empowering their lives and actually taking control of their lives and exercising what that may be in terms of the control of their lives. That's a very positive thing. And if you can point to those examples, then I think that we're on the right trajectory.
I'd just add one thing to that. I think some of the most powerful spokespeople that I've ever heard on this issue have been parents who have lost their children to heroin because they couldn't use a supervised injecting room, because they were doing it in a back alley, because there was no narcotic available. They have been some of the most powerful speakers I have ever heard, and they're the ones we want to get in front of other parents and other people in the community to talk about, this is the effect. If we don't do this, this could happen to your child. And I know every time that this issue is raised in public, and I've been the spokesperson for the Greens, It is the dozens of phone calls I get from parents who want to talk to me about what can they do to keep their child out of prison, or, you know, to keep them alive. And it's, I mean, I don't think we should fudge around these issues, but they are some of these. And at the last forum you organised, can you remind me of the names of the parents who spoke at the last forum you organised? Yeah, Tony was just amazing. So they're the people we have to get out in front of other people too, and so that they know it's real.
Can I just respond? Oh, sorry.
I just got one thought. Tony Tribbington is a candidate for drug law reform, if that's who you're talking about. Yeah, first class man.
I just wanted to make a response because I think that there are vested interests in keeping a whole range of drugs in an illegal status, and I actually think it's not just a question of having a brilliant communication strategy. It's actually having a grassroots movement to change opinion, and I think that's the only way you can do it. And I think what we have seen happen is with the campaign for equal marriage rights, we have seen a change of opinion as a result of a grassroots campaign. And I was interested by Gavin's comments about late-term abortions, and I think, unfortunately, we didn't have a grassroots campaign for a proper grassroots pro-choice campaign, which meant that late-term abortions were left in a very restricted state and for the most vulnerable of women. And I think if, you know, the only way of, you know, the prejudice that Greg talked about, that or speakers Matt talked about earlier, that's a result of a deliberate political campaign by politicians. And it's not politicians responding to prejudice. The prejudice is being cultivated in the same way as prejudice against asylum seekers. So I think we've already got regulation of a whole lot of drugs. That could simply be extended to a series of other drugs which could be legalised. Now there are various intricacies, and you do have to respond to people and people's concerns and so forth. I mean, I think issues of amenity in particular areas, I mean, syringes are like broken glass, so there is a safety issue in terms of if you tread on them and so forth, and you do have to deal with those issues, but the fundamentals are that you need to legalise drugs, but also have proper regulation, not let the corporate interests get away with, you know, putting all sorts of shit out for people to buy.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly say thank you everyone for coming. I don't know how long our speakers are able to hang around for. Unless everyone, yeah, not a problem if you want to keep going for another 5 minutes, and then we've